But now I'm a little bit. So probably sometime mid-year.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Sinai Temple. For those who are here and the many people watching online, it's the New York breeze we brought with you. You know what? I'll ask them to raise it in a few minutes. We are glad that you're with us to be part of this ELNET program. Larry Hochberg, founder of ELNET, thank you for doing what you have done, are doing, and continue to do. Still at it, exactly. To Tom Flesh, who is not here right now, but hopefully watching from home, and a refuah shlema, a quick and speedy recovery to Tom. And a thank you to the Flesh family, as our Flesh Family Israel Center, Sinai Temple Israel Center, brings programs like this through education, through culture, through travel, and through advocacy. We're actually going to be going to Israel in July, Rabbi Guzik and I, so check your emails and flyers in the next few weeks or so. Amazing mission, an adult mission to bear witness, but also to bear hope, as Rabbi Wolpe spoke about from your question last night. So we're going to introduce our guests if you weren't here last night or didn't see, but no introduction needed, but important to say. Ambassador David Siegel, Chief of Staff of 3 Israeli ambassadors to the U.S., our favorite Consul General of Israel. You were the Consul General when I arrived in LA, so that's why you're my favorite, but also when I got here, we were also going through different Gaza crises, and I know you were always the first to call and grace our bima, not just in the high holy days in difficult times, but most importantly also in joyous times when Israel had many accomplishments and helped us lift off our David and Angela Nazarian Fellows, which still continues today, creating the leaders of tomorrow. David Siegel developed deep ties to the LA community, served as commander in the IDF. He is the president of ELNET US, 501c3 that supports the global work of ELNET, which is European-Israel Relations, and based in New York. But now daughter is living here, so welcome home. And to my left, the Right Honorable Joan Ryan, Member of Parliament in the UK, 17 years, served in many senior roles, including Prime Minister Tony Blair's government, served as UK's Special Representative to Cyprus, appointed to the Privy Council by Her Majesty the Queen. Ryan famously resigned from the Labour Party in 2019 to protest its culture of anti-Semitism under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. She's now the executive director of ELNET's UK office, opened in London 2021. So we're switching roles. David was the moderator last night, and now I get to ask a few questions, and then we'll have an open conversation because we're an intimate bunch tonight. So last night you focused the conversation on anti-Semitism. To begin, we'll go from difficult to hopefully hopeful again. I want to use the word anti-Zionism because for many months I would say people distinguish between, oh no, we're not anti-Semitic, we're anti-Zionist, and people can make that distinction. It seems that over these last 16 months now, those definitions have become much closer. Within Europe, because that's what we're speaking about tonight, was there a change in sort of definitions, or was it always close together like this? So we're going to shift from anti-Semitism to anti-Zionism. What did that look like pre-October 7th, and what does that look like now, and especially in speaking to members of parliament in European countries when they're going to Israel? So start with you.
Is this working? Oh yeah, okay, there we go, yeah. I would say that before the advent of Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party in 2015, who you've probably heard of, whose politics were hard, what we call hard left, way lefter than where the mainstream of the Labour Party is. I don't think the word Zionism was, in common use amongst most of the population. If it was, I don't think they knew what it was. And I think an awful lot of people don't really have a definition of it, which is why the IRA definition is so important. And I think the impact that Jeremy Corbyn and his his politics and his followers is quite pernicious. And if you listen to any of the things he was saying, you could see that the terms you could easily take out when he said Zionist or Zionist and Zionism, and put in Jews or, Judaism, and that using the word Zionism, but they're talking about Jews. I'm so sorry. It was pretty obvious that that's what he was doing. I think the reason it's pernicious is that might be obvious to some active frontline politicians. It might be obvious to active Jewish communities, but how obvious is it to any wider communities, even wider political groups? How obvious is it to students? So I think that's where this kind of started to crystallise, and where the terms started to appear to be somewhat interchangeable in the way they were being used. I don't think people really grasped what was going on for quite a while. Now, Keir Starmer is not Jeremy Corbyn by a long way. I don't say he's perfect, but I think he has integrity, and I think he was determined to tackle anti-Semitism within the party. And he made a very important statement less than a year into his leadership and said, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. I think that was a real important moment in telling us where he was at and what he understood. But since October the 7th, what we've seen is that poison of the anti-Semitism crisis that engulfed the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, although Keir had moved away from it and started really rooting it out, it had actually normalised that kind of prejudice. And now we see, after October the 7th, it's seeped into the wider community. I think an awful lot of people think Zionism is something bad, probably not something, not very good. What is it? And I don't think they understand it. And I think we have got to take back the term Zionist and Zionism. We've got to explain it a lot more than we ever do. And we've got to help people to understand what it means. And the IRA definition is fantastic. And lots of countries, governments, councils, bodies adopt it. But do they do anything to then have a policy that implements it? And I think that's the part of the problem. We've got a definition. We know what it means. We know people are merging the terms and in a negative way. We've got this means of tackling it, but we're not actually using it in that way.
So to continue on that, with the IRA definition, about 2 years ago, and that was also very popular in the United States, and we were sort of having some disagreements with public schools in the area about the IRA definition did not give enough room to criticize Israel. And you actually had Jewish voices on that side. What would, I guess, you say if you were in that room, and what does that look like outside of the UK and European parliaments in terms of this anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism?
Yeah, so first of all, hello. Does this work? Can you hear me?
Yep, just nice and close.
So I feel louder? There we go. All right. So I feel very much at home, not only in this in this institution, since my 3 kids went to school here, but in this very room, because right here my son had his bar mitzvah, and this whole room was filled, and Rabbi Wolpe was officiating, and we had other rabbis from the community so it's wonderful to be here and to be with you and to talk about issues that are very difficult, important in all of our lives, in our families, in our kids, our community. Does everyone know what IRA, what the definition is?
You'll share that
so
definition.
it's the International Holocaust Remembrance. It's basically the international definition of anti-Semitism, but it also includes anti-Zionism, which made it very controversial, because if it was only about anti-Semitism, you should not be an anti-Semite, that shouldn't be that difficult, even today, for governments to deal with. But it has 5 provisions in it about the way Israel is being treated. And if it's treated differently than other countries, beyond just regular criticism, it could be seen as anti-Semitism. So even academically, it's a difficult concept, because it's 2 different things, and as you both said, merged into one. The good news is that in Europe, even before the United States, that adoption took place. So 32 countries in Europe have adopted IRA to various degrees, and Joan, of course, is right that the issue is enforcement and the issue is education. There's a lot of things to do, but at least there's a good beginning, where 32 countries in Europe have adopted IRA, most of them before the United States. The White House, under the Biden administration, adopted it, among other definitions, a few years ago, and that was quite a messy process. And you still have issues here, local government and state governments, and about adopting IRA. In Europe, that has largely been done. Not only that, but there's a higher level above it. Brussels, which is in charge of the entire European Union, although the member states, of course, are very, very important in the process. Brussels itself adopted a strategy for the entire continent, not including the UK because it was after Brexit. You are on the continent, but not in the EU. So anymore, for now.
Don't make us leave
Probably
the
right.
continent as well.
But the point is that Brussels adopted a continent-wide strategy to fight anti-Semitism, led by probably the most incredible, after Joan, leader on these issues in Europe, because Katharina von Schnurbein is a German, I think from East Germany, who was, as a 10-year-old child, was taken by her parents to a synagogue, not Jewish, first time, and she met with Holocaust survivors at the age of 10. And the way she shared the story with us, and Joan actually was the moderator in Paris in a conference that we had, she said that from that age on, she decided that she was going to dedicate her professional life to fighting anti-Semitism because of that experience of being a 10-year-old child, meeting with her parents, with Holocaust survivors. They were the only ones in a synagogue. There were less than 10 people there. So it was a very moving experience for her. She today is in her late 50s, I would say, and she's been, quite a practitioner in the EU and as a diplomat and as an official. And she is the person responsible for fighting anti-Semitism and conceiving of the process with her office. And they work with the 27 member states of the European Union to adopt their own strategies to fight anti-Semitism and implement it. Now, nothing is perfect, but it's quite a platform. And we have seen these officials fight back. And there's something very inspiring about it. In the French parliament, and France is a very stormy political system. There's a huge Muslim population. You can debate what the percentages are. It's well above the official numbers, let's put it that way, maybe even twice as high. It's very, very high. And the parliament, represents the country by and large, and we worked with legislators in the French parliament to pass that legislation to enforce IRA. It was a very difficult fight because of those 5 provisions about Israel. So in the hard left, and in the Muslim extremist, quarters, that would never be acceptable. So how do you get a parliament to pass that kind of bill that would adopt that officially in France was the challenge. Most of the champions of the pro-Israel world there said it would never happen. Forget about it. We took it on. And we brought a young Catholic legislator, Sylvain Maillard, was his name, very close to Macron when he was first elected. And Sylvain Maillard decided that he was going to help set up an emergency committee that didn't exist before to fight anti-Semitism No one wanted to chair it. He took it on, and he started recruiting members of parliament to join that committee. And then we took them to Israel. ELNET took all 40 of them to Israel, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times. We took him with various legislators. It got to the point where around 200 members of parliament in France came to Israel with ELNET over those 2 years. And we assembled a majority, and they passed the legislation. Now, does this mean that all the problems are resolved? No, but what it does mean that the governments are with us. But sometimes, you need to educate the judges and the police and the teachers. And it's and actually Lord Pickles in the UK taught us that. He said, you have the tools, go implement them. We have the tools. They're in the books, the laws are there. But we need to go to the judges, and we need to go to the lawyers, and we need to go to the police, and we need to go to the teachers, and we need to push society to take this on. So that's, the larger picture of what the continent looks like in our eyes.
And Lord Pickles was the chair of IRA this year. Can I just add something that when Jeremy Corbyn went to the Labour Party National Executive Committee, which is like the ruling body of the party, but out of government in particular, it's very powerful. They were moving a motion to adopt the IRA definition, and he came as the leader of the party and put his own amendment that he put 2. 1, remove the 5 examples that refer to Israel. He lost that. His next amendment was to put, it is not anti-Semitic to refer to Zionism as a racist endeavour. That was his amendment. It is anti-Semitic. I just tell you that to show you when I say, this movement from him to getting Keir Starmer as leader, he might not be perfect, but goodness me, it's a big change. That's why standing up saying anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism was so impactful and so important.
So it's about relationships. That's what I've learned through doing this advocacy work. Maybe if you can share, if you're available, to when was your first time in Israel? What did you know about Israel before you stepped into parliament? Often I hear through things like AIPAC, right? Freshman Congress people, they have lots of things on their list, from economy to healthcare. Israel's like number 6 on their list, and then they talk to us. What was your experience before you got into government, and what was that moment, that either an aha moment or you understood like, wow, this is something that I can actually make a difference with?
Well, I'd never been to Israel before I was a member of parliament. However,
What year did you enter?
1997.
Got it.
And I went to Israel in 1998. So Labour Friends of Israel approached me and said, we're running a delegation to Israel. We'd like to ask you, would you like to join it? I mean, they were knocking at an open door. It wasn't, difficult for them. And I just said, well, yeah, definitely. So I did. And it does have a huge impact on you, more than anything else. It's quite overwhelming in many ways. And the reason they were knocking at an open door, I don't think I'd ever met, I might have done, but I didn't know it. I'd never been to a synagogue. I'd never met a Jewish person when I was a kid. We lived in a very Irish community, but my mum and dad weren't anti-Semitic. They didn't say things like that. They would have been very upset if I had, or my sisters. However, in the 1980s, I was a freelance oral history interviewer for the Imperial War Museum, and I interviewed civilians as opposed to military. And I had the privilege of interviewing concentration camp survivors. And that was more what they said then, rather than Holocaust survivors. And we didn't have a Holocaust Memorial Day then either. And I interviewed people from Auschwitz, who'd survived Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, people out of ghettos, people who'd been on forced marches, but people who, survived unbelievable experiences. I was an adult. I knew enough to know that however much they'd put their life together and they were striving, that they'd been to hell and back and lost all these family members. And so when I went to Israel, I think it was, and so I knew what the cost of anti-Semitism and that kind of hatred could ultimately be. And I think, I didn't do a lot about it at that point. But when I became an MP and I went to Israel, I think it just came back to me that this really matters. Yeah.
As an Israeli who's obviously done a lot of work in the diaspora, when did you realize that you could make a difference the other way?
The other way, you mean by hosting or
Yeah, 'cause
by
often,
bringing Israel to?
Exactly, bringing Israel to us, because we're all in our bubbles, and obviously we're here, Israel's there, but you've obviously lived your life as a diplomat outside of Israel, trying to bring them there, and vice versa, to sort of round out the circle.
No, it's a great question. Thank you, Rabbi. We're all products of our environment and our upbringing and our values and our experiences, right? And my first experience as a diplomat is funny because they told me, you're going to Washington. And then they said, no, you're going to Taipei, Taiwan. And then they said, you may be going to Turkey. And then it was Shanghai to learn Chinese. And before I knew it, my wife stopped listening. Every time I'd come home excited, I was told we're going. She stopped listening and she said, you know what, when they make a decision, let me know. And from Washington, somehow it became a place called Asmara in the Horn of Africa. This is how the system works, right? So we ended up going to the Horn of Africa with my new bride from the United States, which was a quite funny experience. We ended up in the great nation of Eritrea, which is on the Red Sea, but on the other side, on the Africa side. And it actually was, some of us cried, I'm not gonna say who, all the way there, not me, but no. But it became an incredible experience for us because there was a drip irrigation farm that Israel set up, and we actually helped set up. We brought geologists. They went into the desert, in the Sahel desert, one of the hottest places on earth, malaria everywhere. And there was nothing there, but the geologists knew where to look, and they found a source of water. And then they brought the pipes, and then the drip irrigation, and then the seeds, the best watermelons that you've ever had. And they started growing watermelons and cucumbers. There was a problem because those Africans didn't know that cucumbers are actually edible by humans. They would feed them to cattle. So we taught them how to use cucumbers and tomatoes and Israeli watermelons. And it got to the point where there was so much that they began exporting to Saudi Arabia, across the Red Sea and the other direction, back to the Middle East. And we just saw magic happen on the ground, and we saw Israeli technology and how it can change lives. And my whole approach to diplomacy was always about that. Don't represent Israel as a country that needs charity. Represent a country that gives back, that has something to say in the world, and it started with drip irrigation in Africa and in Europe. I think we all follow the same approach. Europe is a continent today that, it's, excuse the diplomatic term, freaked out by Washington right now, worried about Russia, worried about China. I think those happen to be the three superpowers. Europe is in trouble with all of them. Then they have internal Islamic extremism. They need Israeli counterterrorism support and training and cybersecurity and defense. And when Germany purchased the Arrow 3 from Israel, people were very surprised, but for me, it was just like drip irrigation in Africa. It's building win-win shared interest relationships has been my approach in my career, and it all started from that little decision to send us to the Horn of Africa instead of Washington.
So Michael Oren wrote a book in just came out last year. He was written before October 7th, was published right after October 7th. It's called 2048, The Rejuvenated State. Written in English, Hebrew, and Arabic, specifically to have many different audiences. He was here right after October 7th. But in this last sort of chapter in that pamphlet, if you wish, he says when he's asked to define the word Zionism, he defined Zionism as responsibility. And he uses 3 words: responsibility, vision, and will. You talked about reclaiming Zionism. How would you define to this next generation what Zionism is? Is it perhaps Michael Oren's vision, or is it something else that will allow people to understand it's not colonialism, apartheid, etc., but it's this that they should be focusing on?
Well, I like his words, but they're not specific enough, I think, to stand alone in relation to Zionism. They're great words, and you can add them in without any trouble. But I think you have to talk about self-determination for Jewish people in a Jewish homeland, because it's a Jewish state. And you can't leave that out, I don't think. Maybe people who understand that definition can then move on to those words. But I think understanding about self-determination and why it's Israel, I think that's the important part of the education that people need to understand. And what people question, it's funny, isn't it, that, they question the words Jewish state. Why Jewish state? Why a Jewish state? But they don't question when terms like that are used for other Middle Eastern states that are, they'll say Islam or Muslim or whatever. Nobody questions that. And they question, that they've come to believe on the hard left that it is colonisation. I said last night that that's part of what we've got to take back. And I say we, even though I'm not Jewish, because I think we've all got a vested interest in dealing with this issue. It affects everybody ultimately. And I think the greatest decolonisation movement of the 20th century was Zionism. And I hope that will figure in history and politics and sociology and everything else in schools, because it should. So I would want to start with the IRA definition itself. I think it's really very important. And I think if you've got a definition that's been adopted by so many countries and so many different bodies, that that's the place to start. If you start redefining it, you'll have all these people coming in with their own amendments again. We've passed that stage. Let's go with this definition that we've got, and let's talk about how it can be implemented.
So something happened the other day that I would love your answer based on what you just said of self-determination. I was teaching a class of Introduction to Judaism, people who, most of them are not Jewish and interested in Judaism. The class was Israel, and I started by saying Zionism is, and I used the definition that you just said, self-determination of the Jewish people. And somebody came to see me the next day saying I was critical of everybody else besides the Jewish people in the Jewish state. So for somebody who, basically they said, you can't just talk about the Jews because there's other people living there, minorities, etc. How would you answer this to, and this was a young person on a college campus, very educated, getting a PhD that will one day be a professor in probably Jewish history. How do we answer that?
First of all, there's a great book by Amnon Rubinstein about Israel among the nations, and the book is very similar to what we just heard from Joan. First of all, if you look at most of the flags in the world, certainly in Europe, they have crosses on them. So and when you say Jewish state, do you mean religiously Jewish or the peoplehood of the nation of the Jewish people? Because if you are, and that's, I think, the correct, and that's the way Israel defined itself. It didn't define itself as a Jewish state religiously in 1948. Right. And there was a big debate about that. It defined itself as the state of the people, of the Jewish people. And if that's the case, is this not loud enough? Okay. If that's the case, then there are many, many countries on earth that have majorities and minorities. And Israel should be judged just like all those other countries. And some countries celebrate Sunday as the day off. And you know, in the Muslim world, it could be Friday as a holy day. In Israel, it's the Saturday. But those are national days. They're not necessarily religious days. So it really starts there. And Israel, and if you read Amnon Rubinstein's book, and he just passed away recently, he was a very liberal world sort of leader, and it's worth looking at the book, and maybe we can find a copy for Sinai just to look at. It's a beautifully written book by world experts on comparing nations and the way they treat their minorities. And in Israel, Arabic is more or less an official language in the country. They have their own educational system. They have their own judicial system. They have an autonomy, a civic autonomy in terms of, you know, administrating themselves under the law. There's full equality. And in recent years, there have been some more populist things in Israel that we'll put aside for a moment. But the fundamental basic laws of the country are just as liberal, if not more liberal, than most other Western democracies. So I think it's very easy to work this through, but it's good to have that blueprint. And I would really recommend the book Israel Among the Nations by Professor Amnon Rubinstein. Very easy to follow, chapter by chapter, majority-minority relations in the West and in democracies, and Israel in particular.
So I'll ask one last question, then we'll have some time to converse. We do a lot of work, or we try to do a lot of work here in interfaith relations. It was working really well, and then October 7th happened, and a lot of us asked, where are our faith partners? It was very easy to feed the homeless. It was very easy to make Thanksgiving and Christmas meals and turkeys, but October 8th was more difficult than we thought. What does that look like in the UK or Europe? Are there interfaith aspects that are being involved with the Israel advocacy? Are those places where people actually can connect, or are those places that are sort of being divisive right now as well? And obviously coming from somebody who's not Jewish.
Certainly for some faiths, they're very engaged with Jewish communities, and some denominations, should we say. I think I'm basically talking about Christian denominations. I really don't know the degree to which any mosques have been supportive. So I don't want to say you can all imagine what you imagine, you know, I just don't know. But I know many Christian denominations have been supportive, and that's certainly true in Ireland, that if it wasn't for the evangelical and born-again Christians, I think you'd really struggle to find a foundation of support in Ireland. But they've been very vocal, and with the Ireland-Israel Alliance, they've organised marches, which is quite brave, because it's quite aggressive, the anti-Semitism can be. Not by everybody. You've got to be careful about generalising, really, with these things. But certainly some Christian denominations. And I just think it's very disappointing if a faith organisation doesn't recognise that there's more in common than divides from all other faiths, and that if their faith is meaningful and the values are meaningful. And I'd say this about humanists as well, all faiths and no faith, that if you've got decent values, then of course you should be working together.
Have you seen any faith aspects across the work in ELNET that's helping people together?
First of all, Rabbi, I think it's very important locally and globally. And locally, when I was Consul General here, we tried to get all the schools and all the communities to work with churches and mosques when possible, and minorities, and this is Black History Month, and to think about how we give back. And even when we're disappointed sometimes when they're not with us on October 8th, Hopefully they'll be with us the next October 8th. So it's always worth investing, and I think we've seen it in our own eyes. Certainly, we're in the business of cultivating leadership support for Israel. I didn't mention, but since October 7th, we've had 30 delegations from 27 countries in Israel through ELNET. And all of these delegations, most of them are non-Jewish. Many of them, majority of them, have coming for the first time, and it's the same, experience that Joan had. And you see it in their eyes. We have tremendous friendships out there. And it was Rabbi Wolpe that said, we're very good at identifying our enemies. We're not so good at cultivating our friends and nurturing our friendships. And we need to do that. We need to do that. And we do this at ELNET all the time. So it's funny, my wife is at AJC, and when they meet someone who's not Jewish and also sympathetic to Israel, it's sort of a big thing. For us, that's what we do. This is the only thing we do. We're engaging with these people. So just to give you a really interesting example, the Middle East is divided into 3 large groups. There's the Shiite, the Iranian camp, which right now is descending for now as a result of the blows that they received this year. And then the Sunni world is really divided into 2. You've got the moderate, quote unquote, the Gulf countries, the peace circle around Israel. Those are the Sunni, one group of the Sunni countries. And then you have the other Sunnis that are more connected to the Muslim Brotherhood network, and that is Hamas, Qatar, Turkey, and that is a different kind of Sunni, Syria now, which is much more extreme and very dangerous. Now, if you go to Europe and you look at the Muslim communities there, they reflect those 3 camps. It's not one camp. So what ELNET does is it brings to Israel moderate Muslim leaders, especially from France and from the countries, the Franco-speaking countries, but we'd like to expand that in other countries, and I know that in the UK there's some work on that as well. And we bring them to Israel, and it's the most amazing thing.
Have they ever been to Israel before, these moderate Muslim leaders?
Some of them come over and over again, but some
before
come for
you
the first
bring
time.
them, not often the first time.
We've brought people that were there for the first time,
Nice.
and they went to the president's office in Jerusalem, and they talked about discrimination against them in their own societies, and how are the kids and the young people dealing with that. And these are people that are invested in integrating themselves in Europe, not becoming now, and they're also connected to the Gulf and to that camp in the Middle East that is fighting extremism, religious extremism. So we need to understand that the future is not to blacklist everyone. The future is, where are your friends? Be strategic. Reach out to people that want to reach out to you. There are Muslim leaders in Europe that could be are very effective in fighting back. They're in the streets as well. You should hear them talk about Muslim extremism. It's more extreme than the way we speak about Muslim extremism. So they're there. They just need to be cultivated.
So I'd love questions in this intimate conversation. Anybody? Sam? I'll repeat the question for the online audience.
It seems to me that it's wonderful what ELNET is doing, APAC is doing, which is taking leaders to Israel to teach them about Israel and to help them be on our side. I think it seems that the world is going towards the youth, the younger folks, the universities, who need to actually be approached and taken to Israel and learn about. I think it might be a little too late to start it. So just a thought. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I think a lot of things, and I'm sure Joan has a few ideas as well. It's a very important question. Look, there are different organizations in the Jewish world and the pro-Israel world, and each one specializes. And so we're not Stand With Us. We would never be Stand With Us. We do work with young politicians, but we'd like, and we actually had conversations about this today, we'd like them to be already involved in the political world so that we know that we're investing in something, and we're small. So we don't have that much to invest. So it's either a chairman of a committee or a young person, but you want to make sure that that young person is on some sort of path to some sort of, a more higher political office. And we do that, but again, our main mission is to work with the elites, with the think tanks, with the journalists, with the members of parliament, with government officials, with military officials, and bring them to Israel. You're absolutely right that the next generation needs to be engaged. We can do some. We could do more with more resources, and this is why we're talking to the communities to understand how important this work is. Most American Jews focus locally. They focus here on Los Angeles, or they'll focus on AIPAC in Washington, but they're not really thinking about the world. Israel is a small country, and in order to continue surviving, it needs all of the countries that it can assemble in a coalition with it. And when we look at Europe, we see the largest markets. Israel's exporting and importing from Europe. Technology, Israel is a high-tech nation, but it's been at war now for a year and a half, and the economy is really suffering, and it needs those markets, it needs those partnerships. And I'll say something beyond that for the younger people in in this whole conversation, is that the future of technology is not about small startups. It's not about an 8,200 kid that came out of the army and got a few investors, $20 million, and put together an amazing team and then sold the company and exited. It doesn't work that way anymore. Now it's in the era of AI, it's about investments, billions in data, in GPUs and data centers, and Israel is many, many years behind. So what this means is that we need to invest in our friendships, in our partnerships, so for many, many reasons, that would be, my approach to that. But go ahead, Joan, if you want.
I assume by young people you mean all young people, whether not just Jewish young people, yeah? Because for Jewish young people, I know there are parents and organisations that worry that their young people are criticising Israel in an extreme way and turning against Israel. And there are some great organisations in the UK like United Jewish Israel Alliance and Stand With Us, but Stand With Us is broader. But United Jewish Israel Alliance and others who take young Jewish people to Israel and try to help them to understand their relationship to Israel. The problem, though, is a lot broader than that. There's the way outside of the Jewish community. There is a survey recently that shows that 1 in 3 young people in the UK, 1 in 3, think that Israelis treat Palestinians like the Nazis treated the Jews. So 1 in 3. 1 in 3.
I don't think it's that different in this country either.
That's got to be a major worry and concern. And so, there isn't an organisation that's going to be taking all young people to Israel. There isn't a UGI that's going to be doing that for, it's enough that they can manage to do it for the Jewish young people. So the obvious answer is education. And that's why, what Keir Starmer is suggesting about teaching Holocaust and understanding of that, and knowledge of that, within the school curriculum as a compulsory element and an ongoing element throughout the school career is so important. But also previous governments who've done such a lot of work to fund things like the Holocaust Educational Trust that has education programs that it delivers in schools, and it trains teachers to be able to deliver it, and it takes young people to Auschwitz, and it recruits them as ambassadors for the Holocaust Educational Trust. And now that we're getting to the point where there's very few survivors left, because they have, as we've said, with Katrina von Schnorban, and when I met them in the 80s, they had a tremendous impact, just like going to Israel does. But even with holograms and everything else, we're going to lose that face-to-face impact. And they've done such a lot of work in schools. So it needs to be part of the curriculum, and I can't think where else we can look other than to all those other institutions, like faith institutions. I think if they don't have a responsibility to tackle hatred, then I can't imagine what else. Surely they must have. It must be part of what they want to do in the world. And hatred eats people up. So it really damages those young people.
And technology doesn't help. You have bots and you have so much going on in social media that catches the kids. And once somebody says Gaza, that's all they see. You know, all these things are happening at the same time. So it has to be a technological solution. It has to be a long-term educational solution. And we have to engage many, many partners in this. And it's going to be a battle.
And we've got to get, onto campuses in a bigger way. But further back the pipeline into primary. And my daughter's a primary school teacher, and they teach about the Holocaust. And she teaches in a Church of England school. And that's right. That's how it should be. But on campuses, I think vice-chancellors, which I think you call presidents, many of them have absolutely abrogated their responsibility. These are young people. I know they're 18 and technically, they're adults legally, but these vice-chancellors, these presidents have a duty of care. They're supposed to be educating, and they are abrogating that responsibility and allowing Jewish students to be persecuted, other students who are standing by them to be persecuted, lecturers to be bullied who are willing to stand up to it, not allowing people a platform who want to talk sense and decent things, and allowing others to get up on platforms and say terrible things, and the poisoning the hearts and minds of young people who are indoctrinated with this. And they're allowing onto campus and into their organisations extremist organisations and extremist individuals. And I think it's right that we should act to deal with that.
Hi. I wanted to, if you'll bear with me, I walked through the Nova exhibit. I don't know if you guys went through the Nova exhibit. And it was kind of overwhelming when I walked through it, as it was for everybody. I like what you're doing. I know that there are young Israelis and Palestinians at the grassroots level who are friends, and they're doing tours, and they're trying to reduce anti-Semitism through this partnership of Israelis and Palestinian young people in their 20s and 30s. So there needs to be the grassroots effort, as well as at the top leadership level, at the prime minister level. I can't predict the future in terms of the Israeli prime minister in the future, and Abu Mazen is going to be gone soon. So I don't know who's going to take the place of Abu Mazen. So there have to be the top political leadership, as well as at the grassroots level, needs to make the effort. So there's that, and then there's, I went to an event recently at the LA Holocaust Museum where an IDF soldier spoke about the war in Gaza. He said that every home that he went into had Nazi propaganda. So part of it has to be how the parents raise the children. There can't be a discrepancy between the home and what's taught in the schools. And maybe the kids need to be taught sooner than when they get to college. Maybe it's too late by the time they get to college. So there are a number of things there that should be addressed.
I think we all agree. When I was Consul General here, I featured many groups that were trying to do grassroots work between Israelis and Palestinians. I think these days it's a little bit more difficult. Israeli society has gone through a trauma that is not unlike the Holocaust, and we're continuing to relive it right now. I mean, the breaking news tonight is that they identified Shiri Bibas's body now, and the two boys that were, strangled by hand by the terrorists and mutilated. And, this seeps into society. How could it not? And Israel today is a very different place than it was at a time when this was more viable. And it doesn't mean that there aren't, and I have friends that are trying to do that. It's going to be very, very difficult. Gaza was controlled by Hamas, which is a totalitarian, genocidal terror organization that controlled close to 2 million people from birth to death for 20 years. They didn't see anything else. They didn't hear anything else. They didn't learn anything else. So if there's Nazi propaganda in homes, I'm not surprised. It's simply not surprising. And it's not to say anything about the civilian population. That's a whole other debate. This was a population that was held captive by Hamas for 20 years, and we're seeing the results. And it's a big, big, big problem long term. Whoever the prime minister in Israel will be, the trauma of October 7th will continue to unfold in society in ways that we don't even foresee, and we just have to understand that this is part of the reality. No one serious today believes that a two-state solution is viable right now. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be investing in that vision and trying to, redirect things in the future. But right now you have Hamas. Hamas is still there, as we can see, every single day, and every time. And tomorrow morning, with God's help, they'll release 6, alive hostages. They'll do it in a ceremony. They're doing that ceremony to continue to consolidate their power. They're literally signing documents. In the Arab world, the stamp is your authority. There's something symbolic about this, and they're trying to retain power, and they are. They're coming back. So we've done a lot in the Middle East this year, Israel, vis-a-vis Iran, vis-a-vis Syria, vis-a-vis Lebanon, Hezbollah. Hamas is still there, despite everything. And now, Trump is coming up with ideas, and if we don't like his ideas, then countries should come up with other ideas, and that's basically the conversation right now. It's going to be very, very difficult looking at a peaceful future between the Israelis and Palestinians. Right now, the West Bank is blowing up. It's funded by Iran. The Iranians are invested in investing resources on the West Bank now, after they lost Gaza and they lost Lebanon. So it's West Bank. Yesterday, 5 buses were supposed to explode, and some of them are the double buses. They were supposed to explode simultaneously, because the whole system of building suicide bombers and these underground labs, it's all coming back to the West Bank. It's not going to be an easy road ahead. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands that. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and work at it in diplomacy, but it's going to be very, very difficult in that part of the world. And politically in Israel right now, there are certain things that Prime Minister Netanyahu is willing to do, evidently not enough to create an alternative in Gaza. Alternative in Gaza can be seen in all sorts of ways, but that's a whole nother conversation, neighborhood by neighborhood. Do you need to move population, and where would you move them to? Who would accept them? No one will accept them. We're in a world saturated by immigration crisis. Those Palestinians that could leave, do you know this, have already left. The Rafah crossing was open, and those Palestinians that could get work visas overseas and are professionals are long gone. So you're looking at unemployed, uneducated, people that have been indoctrinated by the Muslim Brotherhood. Who in their right mind would take them to another country? And this is why Jordan and Egypt are saying, not to me. So there's a big problem here, because even if you moved everyone out, it would take 10 years to rebuild Gaza. So if you're going to do a piecemeal, neighborhood by neighborhood, street by street, and it's all booby-trapped by Hamas, it's going to take many, many years. So this is a big problem. Not every problem has an easy solution. You can't.
Any more questions? Yeah, we'll do one more.
The educational system in Europe and universities. And I know that we're all familiar with what's been going on in the universities here in the United States. But in Europe, are there Jewish organizations that are working to make it better? Are there certain governments in Europe that are helping? Like how is it being dealt with in Europe?
campus.
On a, yeah, let's say college campus.
Yes, there are. There are Jewish organisations, that's for sure. And there are certain universities where Jewish students tend to go to. And they have had some terrible times. There's no question about it. But I think there is a very slow dawning recognition of this and how wrong it is. But it's not going to disappear overnight because a lot of the students have been organised really by hard left activists. And they've been sold the idea that the Palestinians are being persecuted by Israelis. And they're sold the idea that Israel is an oppressor, a colonial power, and is an apartheid state within itself, and how it treats the Palestinians. And like all young people, they want to take action. You know, they want to do something that matters. And they're sold this idea that this worked with anti-apartheid in South Africa to a degree. The sanctions, the marching, the action, and that's why they're attracted to it. But they're being sold a lie, mostly, and the lie they're being sold, even if it was the situation, what they're doing wouldn't be the solution. So it's really very, very damaging. And we've had situations where there's tents and students running a gauntlet to get into their studies.
We had that down the street.
Yeah, it's
I watched
shocking.
it.
But that's why it's about, you know, these vice chancellors or presidents and allowing lecturers to feel they've got to live in fear. And we've had lecturers who are persecuted to the point that one lecturer committed suicide. I mean, maybe there were other issues as well. We don't know. You don't know somebody's life. But he was threatened that he'd lose his job because he was fighting back and challenging anti-Semitism. So we've had some real problems. Parents very worried, asking their kids not to wear their star. Anyone who's supporting the Jewish students also being persecuted. Students who are Jewish being driven out of meetings and not allowed to join certain clubs, told it's full or they'll get back to them, or just being told they're not wanted. So yeah, we've had real problems. But there is kind of fight back going on. There's a young man working in our office who was part of, he's finished at Leeds, got a good degree, really lovely young guy. And he was really very, very vocal and strong and organising at Leeds University, where a lot of young Jewish people go to Leeds. It's a great university. They won't stay great if they allow that kind of culture to flourish and to really bed itself in, and they become that kind of an institution. I don't think any university could flourish in that situation. But it is difficult, and it's a long way from completely resolved.
So last question okay. 2 questions and then we'll conclude.
I will. One of the most interesting things we've learned is that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, now we understand, is more or less the same issue. Whereas previously, the intellectualists said, well, Israel doesn't do everything right, but I'm not an anti-Semite. We learned that's a false narrative, because you're anti-Zion, it means you're anti-Jewish homeland, anti-Jewish. Okay, now we say, and it's true here in Europe, same issue. Is anti-Semitism, do we join anti-Semitism fight along with anti-Islamism fight? When we do that, we feel holy. But the fact is today that when we join, anti-Islam is one thing, anti-Islamism is another thing. So You can't join effectively anti-Semitism and anti-Islamism and expect that to get you what you want to go, in my opinion. Am I making any sense?
I think so. No, you're right.
Yeah. Jennifer?
One last question?
Yeah, last question.
Okay. Thank you, David, Joan.
That's not a question. I'm just kidding. But thank you, yes.
Hey, you know what I wondered is, you know, as you're attempting to, and we have to really make a great thrust to define Zionism as it really is, because that's been hijacked, right? But it's swimming in this sea of words that's also been hijacked. Colonialism, occupier, and so much of that, I've seen it for 20 years in the press. And so I want, you know, where they're manipulating the minds of their readers by attributing these definitions to these words that didn't mean that before, right? So I guess my question is, are you working with journalists, with the
Good
press,
question.
in order to, let's even give them the benefit of the doubt that they're just ignorant of the, and they need an education, but I wondered if ELNET is involved itself.
Well, we've taken a number of delegations of British journalists to Israel, and we've also, when we've taken high-profile people like the military experts panel and the General McCall, we then connected him up with a very good journalist, really good writer, and he could brief him, and he prepared him to write his articles in a way that they were readable. So yes, we do that kind of work. You know, if you want to, if somebody goes to Israel and they're not a writer, they're not a communicator, you know, of the written word, then it's you know, it's good to give them some support. And won't say anything they don't want to say, and there's certainly no general ever did, I don't think. But yes, we take delegations, and we've got a global delegation, and that means each of the countries where ELNET is represented, and others, actually, we will recruit. We will be given a number like 3 or 4 each, and we'll take a whole group. And that's what we're going to be doing in, I think it's 2 months' time, isn't it? And yeah, I think it's really important. And when we took the military delegation and we met with the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, and the generals said to them, there was about 4 generals in this group, they said to him, let the press in. We've seen Rafah. It is a lot of rubble. It is quite shocking to look at. But when you understand how this unbelievable war has had to be fought, different to any other, on 3 levels, underground, on the ground and in the air. And we saw the houses all booby-trapped, and the booby trap operated from underground, and cameras in all these dwellings, and people who were living in them as well. And when the soldiers would go in, they'd activate the booby trap underground and kill Palestinians at the same time, and try and kill the IDF, and often did manage to. And of course, that's part of the problem of trying to find hostages. And what the military experts said, who'd all served in NATO or Afghanistan or in Iraq, and you know, they had seen and understood how difficult it is to prosecute a war and what happens in war. And what they said was the standards that the IDF adhere to in terms of the rules of war and the international humanitarian law around war are at least as high as the UK, General McCall said, and in some cases higher. And the accountability. And they were really impressed with the IDF. And it was good to get that out there and challenge some of this disinformation that we've seen about the IDF. So I think it makes a big impact, and I think that's why they were saying to the Prime Minister of Israel, Let the journalists in. Israel's got a story to tell. You're letting Hamas win the whole propaganda war because you're not letting in the people who can communicate about it.
This was the first delegation since the war started that went with the IDF into Gaza. So you need to understand that what ELNET does is always very unique. And we have such high relations with the Israeli establishment that we're able to do this. It was the first time that the IDF took any large delegation into Gaza to be embedded with the troops, like Joan just said, in order to show them what's happening ever. Now, these delegations are very expensive. This one was 130,000, something like that. It's Shabbat. We won't mention numbers, but those are big, expensive delegations because we brought generals from the United States, generals from Canada, from Australia, from all over Europe. Those are big package projects. So what we need is more resources to do more of those, because what happens is General McCall, who again was #2 in NATO and I think #2 in the British High Command, one of the most celebrated generals in Britain, comes to Israel skeptical and goes back home understanding how important it is to see this and how professional the IDF is. And then he goes on TV on the most important British political Sunday talk show and talks about his experience. So if you want to break through and why do 1 in 3 young people in England, believe that Israel is like the Nazis? Because that's what they're being told by the press, by the BBC and so on. So the way to break through is bring established authoritative, authorities to talk about this in their own cultures, in their own societies. You can't have the Israelis do it. No one's going to listen. But bring the British professionals, bring the French professionals to speak in French, bring the Germans to speak in German. And that's the way we do it, but we need to do much more. We're a small organization, limited resources, and this is why we need the support of the community, our donors, our supporters to do more of this. And we have another one next week.
We do. Yeah.
Huge project, huge.
And it's about 28.
It's so big that we couldn't get a naval ship to fit everyone, so we had to get one of the missile ships. The IDF is giving ELNET a missile ship because our delegation is so large and there's no room on the smaller ships. So, and they don't have that many ships. So, there's maybe 3 or 4, and they're going to be touring the coast of Gaza from the Mediterranean. So what we provide them is an experience that they'll never forget. And that's the idea.
I'll be there next Thursday. Maybe we can hop on.
And it's a British general who's going to lead that delegation.
To drive in the other lane of the sea? No.
He was the commander, general in charge in Afghanistan.
Wow.
So, they have amazing experience. They can really judge what's going on. And so when the public don't necessarily want to believe politicians, they can be very skeptical about politicians. But these people, they carry a weight. They've got a really authoritative, experienced view, and people do listen to them. And it's important, and that's why we take them.
I want to thank ELNET, Larry, for your vision.
Bravo.
And to Sia, who helped everything happen these last 2 days, to David Siegel, to Joan Ryan. Not only are we behind you, but we look forward to partnering in everything that ELNET does in our Flesh Family Sinai Temple Israel Center. And Shabbat Shalom, and please join us for oneg, for cookies.
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Good questions, great moderating.